But for those of us who are here, I do want to thank you so much for joining us and joining in on this initiative. This is like a premier event with, for Fripp Island to go on Zoom with an author in conjunction with our dear colleague, Jonathan. So I want to thank you guys for doing that. And if this is your second or third Zoom of the day, depending on what you do and where you are, and Marcia, I just saw you last night on another Zoom that we
I've been
had.
Zooming every day.
And you can get a little stiff and blurry-eyed, so you coming today. I do want just to remind you guys, as I did on the email, that this is being recorded so that possibly parts of it can be placed online according to, how Jonathan might want to do that. And I would also ask that once Jonathan and Rebecca get started, that you would go and mute your
oh geez.
Kathy, maybe you should just sit very quiet. I will. Yes.
I'll be real quiet.
You should go to your microphone and mute that once we get started.
Sounds good.
Okay. So, well, then let me introduce. I'm going to start out by introducing our host, Jonathan. Jonathan is I like to use that intimate word, our executive director of the Pat Conroy Literary Center. We take so much for granted here, not only on Fripp, but in Beaufort and in our Low Country. And the Literary Center is right at our fingertips. And before we all started, Jonathan and I were sharing a conversation. He was sharing with me how Zoom has opened up people from all over, including internationally, who have come and visited the Conroy Center with the option of Zoom. So that's wonderful. Jonathan became our colleague a number of years ago with the Fripp Island Women's Club. He is a wonderful supporter, and Jonathan, we thank you for that. We want to do our best to support you in the Literary Center. He's also a supporter for our scholarship committee, our Pat Conroy Waters Wide Scholarship Committee. And at present, he's working with us to make connections with the Technical Low Country College as well as USCB. So with that, he is what he is best at doing is supporting our Southern writers. And so, Jonathan, with that, I introduce you and to our group.
Thank you, Pat. I really appreciate that, and I'm so grateful to you for setting up this this conversation tonight, so we can be here on Zoom with some folks out on Fripp Island. I got to live out on the island too. I'm also sort of a former resident, if I can even claim that. I got to live in what was Pat Conroy's house when the Conroy Center was open, sort of part of the transition as I came down to Beaufort to run the Conroy Center. And I miss being out there. I miss seeing all of you both on the island and off the island too. So I'm all the more grateful for this opportunity. And I'm going to introduce Rebecca and get her going. Oh, Flo is here. I'm letting Flo in. Sorry, multitasking right now. So I got to meet, there she is. Yep, she's joining right now. So I got to meet Rebecca and be introduced to this novel, The House on Fripp Island, at the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance trade show back in the fall when Rebecca and I were both presenting authors there. And that's a really wonderful opportunity for folks like me who want to know what books are coming out and what authors I should be paying attention to. Rebecca, as she's mentioned in our sort of warm-up act, earned her MFA in creative writing at NYU. And she's the author of two previous novels, The Gunners and Another Place You've Never Been, which was a long list finalist for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize. Rebecca's third novel, which we get to hear about tonight, The House on Fripp Island, was published last month in June and immediately garnered a long list of praising reviews, including from Publishers Weekly and Kirkus. And it was also selected by Amazon as a top 10 editor's pick for June for the month it came out. I was invited to review the book for the Charleston Post and Courier, which I was very happy to do. The novel is set in the mid-1990s and explores the tensions between two families of summer people, or first-timers on Fripp, the Dailies and the Fords, who, through the framework of a ghost story, we learned from the onset that one member of these two families is not going to make it home after this summer vacation. If I can be so brazen as to quote from my own book review, which I never get to do, by the way, this is how I sort of summed up the novel from my perspective. The tensions between predators and prey and how quickly one can become the other haunt the novel from its ominous beginning to its heartrending conclusion, but Kauffman also deftly crafts moments of great tenderness and light throughout, reminding us that memory endures and life perseveres even after a harrowing and grievous loss. So I'm delighted to introduce Rebecca to you all and let you get to know more about her and her novel. So welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's such a generous introduction, Jonathan. Thank you. And thank you, all the rest of you, for inviting me to be here. This is just a treat to be with you all. I'm so grateful for your interest. So Jonathan suggested that I open by talking about the book for a few minutes and then take questions if there are any. So I thought I would, in talking about the novel, talk through some early inspirations and process, and then we'll take it from there, I guess. So The House on Fripp Island started essentially as a challenge I set for myself to see if I could do something with plot that I hadn't done before. My first two novels are both fairly quiet and contemplative. Both rely heavily on flashback. In both cases, there's one very clear protagonist from the outset whose emotional life is at the center of the book and was therefore at the center of the decisions that I made within the book. And with Fripp Island, I wanted to take a completely different approach. I basically created a straightforward plot puzzle and then set out to try and write my way out of that puzzle. So I devised the mystery, which is introduced in the prologue, which Jonathan mentioned. The reader finds out right away that one character will be killed while on the island, but you don't know who and you don't know why until much, much later. So after creating the mystery, I created the cast of characters, 2 families of 4, and several locals, and then I started writing. So I really didn't know who was going to be the victim and who was going to be the perpetrator in the novel practically until I had reached that point in the first draft. And then, of course, had to do a lot of editing to put in little clues and crumbs along the way to make it all fit. But I'm not at all a writer who outlines things in advance of the first draft. For me, the adrenaline is all in the unknown. So the later in the process of writing a book, I arrive at, sort of those big decisions and the big arcs, the better, because my energy really deflates once I've made those choices. But to backtrack just a little bit in the drafting process, so as the characters started to come together, I had sort of 2 main criteria in mind that I felt like I needed to establish in order to work out who was going to be the victim and who was going to be the perpetrator. So where the victim was concerned, I was really trying to figure out who is either so naive or so just flat out wrong about the world that they are able to stumble unknowingly into a terribly dangerous situation without realizing it. And then where the perpetrator is concerned, I was trying to figure out who both has a lot to lose and also, perhaps more importantly, who has reason to believe, whether the belief is rooted in lived experience or intuition or something different altogether, who has reason to believe that which they value most could be taken from them. In other words, who's most likely to act in sort of deluded desperation. So those are the character qualities that I was looking for specifically as I wrote that first draft to determine how it was all going to play out. And yeah, I guess my last thought where character is concerned is that it is definitely my first love in fiction, and it wasn't until the specific characterizations started to emerge and become distinct and alive to me, that the plot really took form as well. I think my fascination with character is a product of my fascination with the oddities of the human heart and ego. For me, the story that always exists there internally and the absurd idiosyncrasies that constitute our emotional lives, my interest in that generally supersedes everything else that a story can be made of, including plot. But at the same time, I think the best case scenario is that they can coexist, that a plot can act as the means or the vehicle through which rich inner lives are explored. So let's see. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Fripp Island. So I have been there on one occasion. My mother-in-law has roots in South Carolina, and when she was growing up, she had an aunt who had a home on the island. And so her family vacationed there from time to time, and that home is no longer in the family, but Fripp Island is still a super, super beloved and sentimental place to her. And a few years ago, she arranged a family trip to spend a week there. And I was, of course, utterly enchanted. And at that time, I was just starting to play around with the idea of writing a mystery novel. And it felt very fortuitous in terms of timing to be on Fripp, because it instantly struck me as a wonderful place to set a book. So having only spent 1 week there, I have very, very limited knowledge of the island, which I'm sure is abundantly clear to all of you. And it was very much written from the perspective of a first-timer and an outsider looking in. Broadly speaking, I wanted to approach the writing of the island somewhat impressionistically. I wanted to give the color and feel and capture that beauty and biodiversity that a first-timer is likely to notice and appreciate, without actually going so far as to be naming specific roads and businesses, because obviously some very unsavory things happen in the book that I wouldn't want to project onto a location on the island with any sort of specificity. But the island struck me as a setting that would inherently lend itself well to suspense, and this would apply to any island, just the idea of physical parameters to the action. Somehow in my imagination that automatically sort of tickles at danger and the sense of being contained or trapped. And also, with any resort destination, there's a potential for tense relationships between locals and vacationers, and this of course looks very different in different places. And I don't know Fripp Island or any resort destination for that matter well enough to really nail a super specific dynamic there, but it again struck me as a way to just draw more and more tension out of a setting. And in deciding upon or constructing a fictional setting, I think you're always looking for potential pressure points, real or imagined, and then as a writer your job is kind of to press on them in the book and see where that takes you. So another pressure point I wanted to talk about a little bit is the dynamic of class in the book. This is another area that rears its head a bit, and the lens through which I decided I wanted to kind of explore class and privilege in the book was not at all as any kind of expert or social scientist or cultural critic at all, and not necessarily address it broadly or societally, but really just to take a microscope to the ways that having money or not having money factor into small daily decisions, and make that contrast really apparent between the two families who are suddenly thrown together under this one roof. Decisions such as the clothing we wear, the food we prefer, the appliances that we think are necessary or that we think are like absurd and redundant, that sort of thing. And my interest in writing about this, I think, is partly comes from my work as a working artist. I'm very accustomed to the feast or famine freelance lifestyle, and That being said, I've only ever existed on a very, very small little spot on a very large spectrum. I've never been anywhere approaching an extreme of wealth or poverty, but even so, I've seen myself move between financial comfort and financial discomfort very quickly and many, many times. So I've become very hyper aware of how my consumerist patterns change very quickly. And I wanted to express sort of the minutia of materialism and how different that can look to different people. The other element of class that I wanted to explore in the book relates to the assumptions that we might hold about people who are in different financial circumstances. Mistaken assumptions drive a lot of the plot and the action in the book. And in the context of class, there's discomfort between Lisa and Poppy, the two main female leads, who are both initially pretty judgmental of one another's attitude toward wealth. And in the book, it takes some time and some reestablishing of common ground and goodwill to move beyond that. The last thing I wanted to chat about a little bit is actually the line that Jonathan read in the intro, which pleased me so much to see that in the review. He references the tension between predator and prey and how quickly one can become the other and the role that plays in the book. It's a metaphor that I did really intend to explore. I believe as creatures, we operate with free will. I think we have the opportunity to define and redefine ourselves over the course of a lifetime, but at the same time, I think there are powerful base instincts churning within us that can be every bit as potent as the instincts that we usually think of as animalistic. They just present differently in humans. So for example, the same way that animals might smell danger in the form of a physical threat and bolt, we might sense danger, although in our daily lives it's much more often like danger to our heart in the form of someone's going to hurt me, someone's going to leave me, someone's going to disappoint me, and where the animal might run out of the room, and we might do that too, but more likely our instinctive protective measures involve things like putting up walls, rejecting someone before they reject us, expecting the worst so that we're not disappointed if the worst comes to pass, that sort of thing. So I loved exploring the idea, and this did feel to me like a really essential element of the book, that some of our emotions are actually very primitive in their nature, and therefore they're unsophisticated and misguided. And so I liked taking a look at how that can come to bear in various relationships. So that's my little spiel on the book, I think. Would be happy to chat about any questions y'all might have about and whether or not you've read the book.